Okay, it's 7 o'clock. I have not heard the bell, but we have 22 chapters to cover. There it is. So, in saying that, we are in the book of Deuteronomy. We are rapidly coming to the close of this quarter, and we are looking at the sermons that Moses speaks to the people, which is really what consists of the book of Deuteronomy. And I say I have 22 chapters, so that's something like 90 seconds per chapter. It's not the way we're going to do it, but y'all awake? So how we're really going to do this is we're going to focus a lot on the first, especially chapter 6, because that's really the main focus. It really all starts there, and everything else flows from chapter 6 on through the rest of these. And a lot of it is a review. Do you remember what the book of Deuteronomy means? Deuteronomy? Yeah, second giving of the law. It's a repeat. Basically, Moses is coming in and he's reminding the people to listen to God and to remind them as they're about to go into the land all of the things that God has instructed them. So we are at, again, the plains of Moab. We are right on the edge of Jericho, right across from the Jordan River at Jericho there. And that's where Moses is going to make these speeches that we started on Sunday. And so the first speech on Sunday we talked about, the theme really is don't be afraid. And so tonight we're going to be looking at the second of these speeches, which is really going to be, the theme of is beware lest you forget. He's trying to warn them, do not forget the law when you go into the land. And we're going to see that over and over and over again. And as I'm trying to forewarn you, there's going to be a lot of slides that we are just like click, 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 because you've already seen it, and we just don't have time to go through all of these little details of the nitty-gritty of the law. So let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to start in chapter 6. Let's just go ahead and pick up in chapter 6 of Deuteronomy. You're going to see Hear, O Israel a lot. We have a song we sing based off of that. Of Hear, O Israel. The first one is going to be in chapter 5 and in chapter 6, and he's encouraging them to listen to God's commandments, especially when they go into the land, and so that they will live long in the land and be blessed. The second one, he appeals to them in chapter 6, telling them to tell your children so that they will know and they will grow and be blessed in the land as well. And the last one of these, Hear, O Israel, is to be strong and courageous, to be strong, be brave when they enter the land, unlike how they were 40 years ago. So, in chapter 6, I want to pick up in verse 4. It says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord with your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. These words, which I am commanding you today, shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. Okay. Verse 5 says, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. As Steve put it this way, this is the John 3:16 passage of the Old Testament. This is the one everyone knew all the time. They're going to come back to this passage. And it's rightfully so, right? What does Jesus say about this passage over in Matthew chapter 22? Yes, exactly. Matthew 22 says, let me just flip over there. Matthew 22, verse 38, he says, This is the great and foremost commandments, what the New American Standard says, about that passage. Okay, so he says this is the one that everything revolves around of. That's how this is, and really if you think about it, if you love the Lord, all the other laws that are put in there you're going to follow as good as you possibly can. And really the conclusion of loving the Lord with your heart and your soul and your strength is that we want to talk about it all the time. If you have something that you love, you're going to talk about it. And so you see that in verse 7. It says, you shall teach them diligently to your sons. You know, really, when you're talking about something that you love, you're going to teach those whom you love, right? And so this is something that's so important to you, you're going to tell those that you love about it. Verse 7 says, you'll teach them diligently to your sons. You shall talk to them when they sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You know, thinking of that, I think the concept here is that really takes care of every possible thing in life, right? In almost every scenario in life, you're either going to be sitting, you're going to be standing, you're going to lay down. It's all covered there. The concept is Moses is telling them to teach your children all the time. It shall be the main focus in your life. That's what he's trying to portray here. And I think when I think about that, I think of like, well, what all does that consist of? Well, it consists of everything, from even the small things in life. Have you ever been around somebody, maybe in your family, that with every little thing that might pop up in life, they bring up something from the Bible about it? That I'll give you an example of this. Maybe it's honey in the Bible. There's several times honey's brought up. I think of when Jonathan, and you remember King Saul, and he makes a rash vow saying, no one should eat until they finish the battle. And he sticks his staff in a beehive, I think, and he takes the honey, and it brightens his eyes. It's things like that. I think that the Israelites would have made all those little connections and things, and trying to remind their children constantly of these things that go back to God's law. And that's really, I really think, so very, very important. And we'll elaborate more on that in just a second. Looking in verse 8 and 9, we have them binding them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontals on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. Even today, there are Jewish people that have these little boxes on their head that have scriptures on them that are trying to follow this. Jesus brings this up, I think, over in Matthew chapter 23. And he's condemning them on that. And it's because they had taken God's law here, saying to put this on your forehead, and they had taken it and had made it into a look at me situation. They were trying to do this for praise of others. And so we kind of really, when I think about that, it's more of a hypocrisy thing. Like, oh, why are they doing this? But really, God has instructed them to do this not for their praise, but for His praise, so that they would see that and their focus would be on God all the time. That's the entire purpose of that. You know, there's nothing you see in people's houses a lot. People have all these, they have verses on the walls and things like that. Great. It's great to have, unless you're doing it to build yourself up, right? But if it's there to help remind you of God, then that's exactly what God had instructed the Israelites to do. It's all about the heart. In this passage of chapter 4, really through 9, I had heard it say that it's really probably the most important couple of verses when it is regarding, in the Old Testament, regarding parenting and what you need to be doing as a parent. You're talking constantly of the Word. It should be the source of our conversation. Someone, when I was preparing for this, I heard a story about how this man, a preacher, had gone in to visit somebody that had fallen away, a young man who had fallen away. And he went in to visit him, and he noticed that young man was still very faithful to the sports team that his family had taught him to be connected to, very faithful. And he said, ever since that, he has noticed, oftentimes he would go in to talk to somebody, and they're still very, very faithful to sports teams or whatever else. And his point is, are we making too much of a priority on where our allegiance is with our sports teams and with sports than we are having our allegiance to Jesus? It's something that we need to consider because it's something easy to do. I think it's very, very easy to do. And I think it kind of hits home for a lot of us on that. So that's really kind of where we want to start with, and where really what Moses starts with this sermon that he is teaching the people, reminding them. Now, let's continue on in verse 10. I know I'm taking a lot of time in chapter 6. That's okay. It says in verse 10, "Then it shall come about when the Lord your God brings you into the land which he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you a great and splendid cities which you did not build, and houses full of good things which you did not fill, and hewn cisterns which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant, and eat and are satisfied. Then watch yourself, that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall fear only the Lord your God, and you shall worship him and swear by his name." Okay? So, again, you'll see this all through Deuteronomy. You see this concept of God. Moses is reminding us of what God has done for the people, and he's also going to tell them about the promise of what is to come. He reminded them that he's the one that brought them out of slavery, and he is the one that's going to bring them into the land. You know, I noticed that he says, "Splendid cities that you did not build." We'll get into Jericho and Ai, and I think Hazor. There's 3 cities that they do end up burning. But the rest of the cities in the land of Canaan, they do not burn. They use them. They will move right into them and have them as living places as God has promised them that they're going to do. They're going to fall in to a wealth that they have never experienced before, if you think about that. They're going to come into a land with houses they did not build, cisterns they didn't dig. They're going to have vineyards. There's olive groves. You didn't do anything to earn this. And this is also mentioned again in chapter 8, verse 10, when he basically repeats the same exact thing. "When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances, his statutes, which I am commanding you that day." That's chapter 8, verse 10. So he's going to repeat this. I notice here he says at the very end of verse 11 of chapter 6, "When you eat and are satisfied." Now, and he's warning them that when you've done this, you're satisfied. Don't forget the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, right? That's what his point is, lest you forget. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's the Old Testament. And there is nobody like that today that eats and are satisfied and has everything that they possibly need. It's only the Israelites, right? Y'all must have had a long day at work. But seriously, if you think about how much that applies to us today, when these people are excited to have houses and cisterns of water that they did not build, that they did not have to dig out themselves, it's already there for them. Yet we, when we all go home tonight, are going to turn on a faucet and have running water. And we are really, I would say, probably the most blessed and satisfied people to ever live on the earth. How much more does that impact us today? You know, I think, in thinking about that, I I think that one of the things that is one of the biggest issues in our life is that we can be not dependent on God, that we have been blessed so much that we forget who God is, just like the children of Israel are going to do when they're blessed and satisfied and forget God. We do that too. I would imagine that you've noticed this in your life. I know I have. And our theme here at Eastside is prayer. That when there has been a stressful time in my life, whether it be health issue or what, my prayer life goes way up. And when you finally get over that stressful situation, it goes way down. Have you ever noticed that in your life? I think it's the same thing. It's something that we have to be careful. It's something I have to be careful about doing, that I'm having to work on, is having that constant prayer life. Not just when things are bad, but having it when there's good times as well. Do you have any comments? Okay, let's continue on. In verse 18, we have here that you shall do. This is him saying, you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go into the land and possess the good land which the Lord has sworn to give to your fathers. There will be a time coming up, I think, next quarter, that we're going to have the opposite of that. He says here that you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord. There's going to be a time in Judges that comes, and they're going to say, every man did what was right and good in their own eye. That's coming. But look what he says. And you can see in Judges, we will see, that provides chaos. That there is so much evil that happens, it's chaotic. But with God, if you follow Him, things will be well with you. Of course, that is not it's kind of a generic statement like a proverb is. As we see in the story of Job, it's not always like that. But overall, that is the way things will be. Okay. Let's move on and continue this. Backing up, he really starts all of this with the Ten Commandments. That's going to be, as we've talked about, that is the main rock of the Old Testament law. We have the Ten Commandments, as he's going to mention. In chapter 7, we've already looked at chapter 6. Chapter 7, we have his encouragement to destroy all the people and the idols that are there. Look in chapter 7, verse 1. It says, when the Lord your God brings you into a land where you are entering to possess it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations, listen to this right here, greater and stronger than you. You know, if you're going to do a pep talk to a team, you're not going to tell them the other team is greater and stronger than you. But that's what Moses says. He says, you're outmatched, but you have the Lord on your side, and because of that, you're going to win. You're going to defeat them. It's a lesson that the previous generations 40 years ago had not learned, right? And that's the reason that they had to wander in the wilderness for that, as they did not learn that critical lesson. And so in verses 2, we're told that God instructs them to defeat them, utterly destroy them. You're not to intermarry with them. You're not to make any covenant with these people at all that are in the land. God intends for this land to be a blessing to the people. And I think sometimes we think about that and think, well, that's very harsh of God to go in and wipe out, utterly destroy these people. Remember this, that this is not always how God is going to instruct His people to deal with foreigners in the land of Israel. Not only that, you remember in Genesis chapter 15, verse 16, or 16:15, excuse me. It says, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. Okay? The iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. That was around 600 years before this happened. Okay? That he says that. So, He has been patient and merciful with these people. But now it is time. The iniquity of the Amorites is full. And the Amorites there is really kind of a generic term. You can kind of see it up here there on this side, but that's really kind of a generic term for all of the people that are in the land during that time. So going through this, there's going to be times that we're going to stop and just and take a moment to make a connection to another part of really the Old Testament here. But you're going to see several of the things that God is going to instruct His people on, and get a few more details on things like that. What should have made mention in chapter 5, that one of the things I found interesting in chapter 5, verse 15, is that one of the reasons that the Sabbath day is put into place is that because God delivered the people from slavery. Okay, and it's there kind of as a reminder of that. That's not listed in detail in Exodus 20 when that's put into place. But let us continue on. Here we have the code of Hammurabi. I want to say Harambe, if y'all remember the gorilla, but Hammurabi. And it's a little before the law of Moses is. And so a lot of people will say, well, there's nothing special about the law of Moses at all. This is very common for the ancient Near East. You can see that it's a very, this is in the Louvre Museum, so if you're in Paris, you might want to check that out. He was from Babylon. Hammurabi was a king of that area, and he had this code, I think of like 282 laws or something like that, that were put on this stone. And it had to do a lot with all these civil laws that were put into place there in the Babylonian area. And so people will say, well, it's common. This is a common thing. Even before that, there's a code of which is where Abraham is from. And so we see that, and we can see that there are similarities between the two. But there is a major difference in the fact that all of the law of Moses is attached to God. And it's all based off of God and a deity and everything that is going to revolve around that. The code of Hammurabi and the code of these other ones, have nothing to do with anything religious. They are all civil laws, and everything is based off of civil and orderly laws. Of course, the law of Moses is going to have some of that, but it all really focuses back towards God. But just wanted to make mention of that here. Quickly continuing on, we have these are all things that are just mentioned as we kind of fly through this. We have in chapter 15, I want to make mention here of this. Chapter 15, we have remember the seventh year. It's going to be a Sabbath year, really, where you're going to have the land rest. There's going to be other things that happen during that year. One of them is kind of slaves are allowed to go free during that time. But there is, in chapter 15, verse 17, you'll see where I'm going with this in a minute. It says that you shall take an awl and pierce the ear of a servant. Basically, if a servant wanted to not be freed, but wanted to stay a servant, maybe it was a good master, or whatever the case may be, you'd basically pierce his ear. And it says at the end of verse 17, or in the middle of it, he shall be your servant forever. Okay, that's what I want to hang on to for a second. Now, over in Ecclesiastes 1 verse 4, I'm not going to take time to read it. That is a verse that the Jehovah's Witness really use in their false teaching about the earth being forever. The earth abides forever is what is mentioned there. Just to make a connection between the two, the forever there in Ecclesiastes and here in Deuteronomy is the same exact word. that for forever, okay? But you can clearly see here that it doesn't always mean eternally forever, right? Because here in this verse, the servant is going to be a slave to his master forever. Well, that's just until he dies. He's not going to continue to be a slave after he's passed on. No. It really, I think a good way of looking at it is it's indefinite, but not without an end towards that, is a way of looking at that forever in this way. And so we can contrast that with Ecclesiastes 1, verse 4, and the earth abides a whole lot longer, but it does not mean that it is eternal. It's a good way, a good verse to look at when considering that. So, moving on, we've already looked at, in detail, we've looked at setting apart the firstborn. We looked at the feast days. He's going to tell them to appoint judges in every town, to stone the one, to kill the one that turns to idolatry. I think even those that might be related to you. I think he basically says, even if it's your brother and he says, let's go worship this, you're supposed to go stone him, is what Moses says about this. Now, we have the bringing difficult cases to the priest. We've mentioned that before. Now, let's look over in chapter 17. Chapter 17, starting in verse 14. This is the instructions for kings. Okay, at this point with the children of Israel, they do not have a king. It says, when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, you shall say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. All right, let's stop there for a second. Okay, I want you to remember that. So in a couple quarters, probably 2 quarters from now, there's going to be a time in 1 Samuel chapter 8 that the people are going to come and they're going to tell Samuel, we want a king to be like all the other nations around me, okay? To make these connections. This is a prediction. This is something that Moses knows is going to happen hundreds of years before it does. Verse 15 says, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your countrymen. You shall not set a king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. We have a law very similar like that today here in the United States. The president has to be a natural-born citizen, right? It's a common, very common. Verse 16, he says, you are not to multiply horses for themselves. The king is not. Verse 17 is the one I really want to look at. It says, he shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver or gold for himself. Now, I'm going to really strain your brain and really ask a very difficult question that you probably won't remember. Is there ever a time that you remember a king of Israel who has multiple wives and his heart is turned away? Solomon. Yes. Really strains you there to remember that one. And it's because that's what he's known for, right? He builds the temple, but he has all these wives. And really, you think about building that temple, so ornate and so beautiful, and so much work that was involved in building what would be this grand temple for God. And yet Solomon is led away by his wives. And how sad of a story that is. Moses here warns the future king, do not take a bunch of wives because your heart will be turned away from that. And he also mentions in verse 18, talking about the kings, that in the middle of it he says, he shall write for himself a copy of the law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. Okay, so he is supposed to know the law. He's supposed to write his own law. That way he would know it himself, frontwards and backwards. something that we do not see very often in the united or divided kingdom. Okay, quickly moving on. We have the offerings and support for the priest. We have mentioned that before. And in chapter 18, let me back up for 1 second. In chapter 18, verse 10, we have a section of really kind of warning them to stay away from these evil practices, including witches and witchcraft, things of that nature. In verse 10, we see that there shall be found not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire. Manasseh is going to do that, I believe, later on in 2 Kings 21, if I can read my handwriting, that he is going to make his children pass through the fire. And that way, we have that. In verse 11, it says, you're not supposed to have a medium, a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. Of course, Saul is going to do exactly that, right? After the Lord has stopped speaking to him, he is going to go to the witch at Endor, a medium, to call up Samuel from the dead. And that time, it works, but only through God that does work. But there's that warning to not do that. In chapter 18, starting in verse 15, it says, the Lord your God will raise up a prophet like you, like me, this is Moses talking, from among you, from your countrymen, you shall listen to him. Now skip over in verse 18, and I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command you. This, I think, is a two-way prophecy in a lot of ways. The second one we'll get to is, I think, very obvious. The first one, I think this can apply to general prophets in a lot of ways that fulfill this role in Scripture. But because later on he's going to talk about the warnings of those that are that pretend to be prophets but are not. You can decide how that they are not that. But this is ultimately fulfilled through Jesus. Over in Acts chapter 3, verse 22, Peter makes this connection and saying that this is the prophet who Moses speaks of, the one that is like himself there. And so that is ultimately fulfilled through Jesus. You have any comments? I guess I could have put that up on the board before I started talking about it. Okay. Quickly moving on through chapters 19, we have the cities of refuge. Do not remove a boundary marker. I don't know if you heard about, this is a year or two ago, there was a farmer, I think, in the Belgian-French border, somewhere in that area, and the stone was in his way as he was plowing, and he moved it over like 10 feet. Turns out later, that was actually the dividing between France and Belgium, and there was kind of a laugh about it. But that's not quite talking about here. We're not talking about the nations, but we're really talking territories and people's lands themselves, the smaller, the individual lands. We have, quickly going through it, we have rules for going to war. It talks about even that they are not supposed to be like other nations that would rape women in that way. Even that's a very common thing in wars even today. That's things that would happen. He instructs them that does not happen in with his people. In chapter 19, at the very end, in verse 21, we have life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Lex talionis is what that is called. You see that a lot through Scripture. That is going to be something, though, kind of a law of revenge, the law of the tooth. Jesus will mention that as well when he is talking about turning the other cheek. So, quickly moving through, just trying to briefly mention these rights of the firstborn. Showing respect for the things that are different. You can You can read these. I'm not going to touch on quite all of them. Cleanliness in the camp, runaway slaves, all of these things. Temple prostitution is one that would have been very important, would have been big in the land of Canaan. I think with Baal worship especially, you see that. And you see that in, I think it's alluded to in Corinth in the New Testament as well, that there was something like that going on. At least maybe secular history tells us a little more of that. Okay. Quickly going through as you see this, I mean, it is so detailed. Interest on loans, vows. There's a newlywed exception from war. So if a man had just been married, he does not have to go to war for that 1 year, for 1 year that he has been married. Kidnapping, we have going through it. We have leprosy. Leaving the last for the poor, that is one of the ones I wanted to quickly touch on. That he says is chapter 24, verses 19 through 22. He basically instructs those that if you leave something in the field, you're going to let it drop. You know, if you drop something, you need to leave it for the poor because you've been blessed by the Lord. That's going to come up in the story of Ruth when Boaz has a field and he leaves the outskirts and he leaves the things that have been dropped for the poor. And Ruth, of course, is gleaning in his field. And we'll get to that story maybe next quarter, probably next quarter. I don't really know, but sometime soon we'll have that story. And we also have in Deuteronomy 24, verse 16, one of the things I wanted to, I found interesting, it says, the father shall not be put to death for their sons, nor shall their sons be put to death for their fathers. Everyone shall be put to death for his own sin. So there's not going to be an inherited sin from father to son, nor because of the son doing something, the father is not going to have the punishment for that as well. I found that interesting. Now, as we kind of wrap it up very quickly, we have, remember the Amalekites? I think I might have gone too far. Remember the Amalekites? I think that's the story when they're towards Mount Sinai and Moses has to lift his hands up to win the battle. I think that is what he's mentioning there. And so finally, as we kind of quickly finish the summary, in verse 26, in chapter 26 is where I want to finish, just as Moses does. It says, chapter 26, verse 16 says, "This day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and ordinances. You shall therefore be careful to do them all with your heart and with your soul. You have today declared the Lord to be your God, and that you would walk in his ways and keep his statutes and his commandments and his ordinances and listen to his voice. The Lord has today declared you to be his people, a treasured possession, as he promised you, and that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all the nations which he has made for praise, fame, and honor, and that you shall be a consecrated people for the Lord your God, as he has spoken." So he summarizes this with saying that they are a special people and he is their God for that. That's flying through it. Good news is on Sunday morning we have 2 chapters to go over instead of 22. But y'all have any comments? Brett?
Cameron, I was just thinking about the genocides in Romans 2. Paul says, "Is God unrighteous who takes vengeance? No, how can good God judge the world?" So God is the one that calls the shots on the times, and when he takes man from the earth, like in Acts chapter 17, he determines the times of the nation. So it's not these things that Israel would do were not arbitrary. God was calling the shots. He knows the hearts of men. He called the shots of when a nation should be destroyed. It wasn't just arbitrary.
Right, yeah, and I think that really ties into the iniquity of the Amorites not being full, that he knew when that time would be right for that. Anything else? Okay, thank you so much.
We've been learning a lot lately about the sacrifices our Lord asked for under the old law. And he didn't consider a blemished animal to be a satisfactory sacrifice. Everyone in this room lives in a time that the world around us has reduced our Creator's expectations for us down to nearly nothing. Many around us would tell us that we can't do anything to be among the saved. God's grace is all you need. I'm very happy for grace and that mercy and the offering of forgiveness. But just as we read about under the old law, God has specific expectations under the new law as well. I'll be reading from 1 John 4, verse 11 and 12 in a minute. We're told to love, to encourage, and to build up our brethren. In 1 John 4, 11 and 12, it says, "Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought to love one another. No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love has been perfected in us." John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35, we read, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is questioned, beginning in verse 36. It says a lawyer in 35, a lawyer asked him a question, testing him, saying, in verse 36, Matthew 22, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So I read that I can do everything just right, but if I don't have love, then all my work is worth nothing. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, it says, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I have become a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing." So can I offer a blemished version of love? Can I say to my heart, well, I do show love to about 98% of my brethren, but there's a really good reason that I don't show it to that 2%, right? Recently, reading a book by Roger Hillis, he made a statement. He actually states that this is his paraphrase of 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 3. Sorry. It's on the overhead, but it says, "Although I talk about love, if I'm not showing it by kindness, it means nothing. Even if I attend all the services, sing with all my heart, and observe the Lord's Supper faithfully, if I do not have love, I am in real spiritual trouble. And if I preach lots of sermons and teach Bible classes and grade Bible correspondence courses, I am appointed as an elder or a deacon, but I really don't love my brothers and sisters, I won't go to heaven." Is that what 1 Corinthians 13 is saying? I think it is. So can I go to heaven with a blemished sacrifice? Can I withhold love and encouragement and the building up of my brethren because I lack forgiveness? Wouldn't the world say that that's great? 98%? It's hard to ignore the world because it's all around us, especially in what we watch, read, or hear at work. But our Lord's expectations are not the same as the world's. We look at so many traits like honesty and zeal, forgiveness, servanthood, prayer, singing. Are we offering blemished versions of those in service to our Lord? As we strive to have a home in heaven someday with its fleeting earthly life, those of us as Christians remember that we must ensure to not offer a blemished sacrifice to God. Last reading, Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. It says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. If you're not a Christian, but understand what you must do, we can help you now. Or if you're seeking to understand that better, you can talk to one of the men here. They'd be more than happy to study with you and teach what the Word of God teaches on that subject. Let's remember how we should love each other. And if there's anything else that anyone needs of a public nature, come forward as we stand and as we sing.